morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Kay, and I explored the question, how does culture relate to language? Based on the stimulus packet, Vanishing Voices, written by Russ Reimer. Many people have formed arguments on this topic, but for the benefit of time, I will only be discussing two. The two arguments that I have chosen to cover are the claims that language and culture are intertwined and interconnected, and the claim that they're not related at all. The argument that language and culture are interconnected and intertwined is supported by the fact that one cannot exist without the other. They are mutually dependent on each other because to truly understand a language, one must understand the culture that goes along with it. As Edward Sapir states in his article, Language: An Introduction to the Study of Speech, language does not exist apart from culture. That is, from the socially inherited assemblage of practices and beliefs that determines the texture of our lives. In a sense, it is a key to the cultural past of a society and a guide to social reality. Sapir is basically saying that language cannot exist without culture and culture cannot exist without language. In addition, by stating that language is a key to the cultural past of a society, he's saying that in a way people interpret the past is by language and the stories that people tell. A prime example of language dying and the consequences that it brought is the Tuvan language. The Tuvan language was one of the smallest spoken languages in the world, and so as a result of their language dying, a big part of their culture died with it. I apologize because I don't know how to say this word correctly, and I tried to look up Google Translate, but it didn't work. So ziri is the Tuvan method for killing a sheep, although it is very humane and does not spill a drop of blood. It not only means slaughter, but kindness as well. It implies a relationship to animals that's a measure of people's character. It's a big part of Tuvan culture, but unfortunately we are unable to fully translate it into English. So even as I'm attempting to explain it now, there isn't a way for any of us to truly understand the meaning of the word and their culture as a whole the way a native Tuvan speaker would be able to. And here I just have the Tuvan alphabet to just give you a picture of like what their language was. Another example of a language dying is the Aka language. In the Aka culture, a box of talismans and the chants that brought the talismans to life are passed down from priest to priest or father to son. And talismans are just little trinkets or artifacts that carry some sort of sentimental value to the owner, and normally they're passed down like from generation to generation. In one instance, the talisman's holder at the time died before he could teach his son the chants and how to like convey them to people. So even though the son had the artifacts, there was no way for him to bring them to life and show their significance. This really shows how much language is a necessity when it comes to language and cultural traditions. This argument is further supported by Kazauqua's Higgins article where she states, losing a connection to the language of their ancestors is like losing a part of one's being, implying that the language you speak and the language your ancestors spoke is a part of your identity. And when you lose the capability to speak the language, you lose a part of yourself. Sorry. Both of the authors of these articles came to the conclusion in their research that it is not possible to understand or appreciate either language or culture without insight into the other. The counter-argument that language and culture have no relation is not widely supported.
Mike, excuse me. Sorry, Sarah.
It's okay. It is possible to argue that one could analyze culture or language without regard for the other, but why someone would need or want to do this is kind of unclear. The fact of the matter is that a single language is used to convey information for not just a single culture, but many. This gives people reason to believe that because one language can be tied to multiple cultures, there's no way for language and culture to be entirely dependent on one another. Sorry. These clicks are just really confusing me. After researching both sides of the argument, I have found that in order to truly understand and fully comprehend a language, one must completely immerse themselves in the culture of said language. And to truly understand culture, one must speak the language. Because there are words that simply cannot be translated into other languages, it's important for the person to understand the background behind it. All cultures have traditions, and without language, there's no way to pass on these traditions from generation to generation. Therefore, I have come to the conclusion that although it can be argued that language and culture are not entirely dependent on each other, the argument that is more strongly supported is the one that language and culture are mutually dependent on each other. And here's my work. Thank you.
How did you select the strategies you used to gather information or conduct your research?
So I started off with just trying to form a question, and that took a little bit of time. I was kind of jumping around from a few different things. And then I decided that I wanted to do an argument and a counter argument, and I knew that the argument that I was going to choose was going to be the stronger one because that was obviously going to be my conclusion. And so I just kind of researched different articles and tried to find evidence for each argument that I had.
And what advice would you have for other researchers who consider the topic?
I would definitely say that it's important to look at lots of different examples because a lot of them are so different, lots of different cultures and languages. And for looking at a counter argument, I would say that you can either find that or one that's sort of in between, not saying that they're completely separate or completely dependent on each other, but one in the middle.